Now, as you can see, once the Confederate artillery sees Union forces bunched in a group, they start laying fire into them. These are the Washington artillery from New Orleans. And you'll see that they basically start firing at the Union cluster that's across the creek. The Union is going to be forced, obviously, to spread out their forces more to minimize casualties. Now, once the smoke is seen by the Union artillery, they now realize that there's Confederate artillery in those woods, and they will begin to respond and try to knock out Confederate cannons. And so the battle opens. The very first cannon in the Union bombardment was a 30-pound piece of artillery, fired a 30-pound shell, and was brought all the way from Washington, D.C. to the battlefield. And it had one of the heavier artillery projectiles in the early part of the war. So that starts tearing into the woods. Now keep in mind, the Federal forces are not aware of the fact that Longstreet's entire brigade's in that woods. So when some of these shells fall, they start to break branches and parts of trees, and some of them fall down on Confederates. But the Confederates do not want to reveal their infantry position. They will only come forward when the Federals begin to make a crossing. Now you can see the cavalry units will now start fighting, because the cavalry units precede the infantry. Now the Federal plan here was not to cross directly where the heater house is and to attack the Confederates in those woods, but rather to sweep around to your right and try to bring some artillery pieces into action and cross the ford. In addition, they would send an entire brigade of Federal infantry across the ford. So as you see this develop, you'll see that there's fire back and forth across the valley between Union and Confederate artillery. Fairly soon you'll see infantry start exchanging fire. But the most important thing to look for is when you start to see Federal infantry sweeping off to your right and then crossing over the run to try to cross into the Confederate positions. Now you also notice that the Confederates are sending skirmishers up to the banks of the creek. They want these skirmishers up there just in case the Federals try to force that position. Those skirmishers, of course, will fall back into the regular infantry units as the Federals push. Now, as this action develops, if you watch the signal tower over in the opposite hill, they'll be directing Federal forces into position. And if you look at the signal tower that's back behind you, that's the Confederate tower that's going to send a message back to Beauregard's headquarters that the Federals are trying to press against Buford's force. At this point, Early's brigade is mobilized. They have a 3-mile march, but you'll eventually see them come into action. But they're not all ordered forward yet because they're not quite sure if this is a genuine Federal move or if it's a fake move and the crossing will be elsewhere. At this point, the 30th Virginia Cavalry comes into action and strengthens the Confederate flank. Now you'll notice that the Federal infantry are now opening up fire across the stream to keep busy Confederate skirmishers that are tied up along that line.
Yeah.
At this point, the Federal Army does not want to reveal to the Confederates exactly where they plan on crossing. So at this point, the Confederates still have no idea the exact point that the Union infantry will cross. That's the reason why the cavalry units are so spread apart. Those of you who are familiar with Bull Run Creek probably know that there's a series of 8 or 10 crossing points, any one of which the Union Army could use to make the crossing. There's Mitchell's Ford, there's Blackbird's Ford, there's McLean's Ford, and the Union Army has made a decision that it's going to come across Blackbird Ford, but the Confederates don't know where, which ford they picked. The Confederates were forced to divide their army into segments that would guard each of these fords and keep a reserve force available in the event that a crossing occurred. The reserve force would then go into action to try to push the Union back across.
Sounds so different being up here than in the middle of it.
What you observe now is a Federal skirmish line advancing toward the ford, and since this looks like it's going to be a push, the Confederate skirmishers start to pull back to the main infantry forces. At this point, The Union forces still do not know that Longstreet's entire brigade is in the woods waiting for them. Now, those of you who are Civil War buffs will probably know that the Union forces at this point consist of the 1st Massachusetts, the 2nd Michigan, the 3rd Michigan, and the 12th New York. Those are the 4 Union regiments that are going to be making the crossing. And I think you can see at this point the Union made their decision, and they're going to cross at Blackbird Ford and attempt to pierce the Confederate line. Now at this point, as you can see, the Federal Army is crossing Bull Run. They're basically with skirmishers out front. They're bringing in an entire brigade. They're crossing. They're hoping to sweep around the Confederate flank, still not knowing about Longstreet's brigade hidden in the woods.
Josephine's on. Get your arm in the picture.